The international system is facing accelerated transitions as competition between the great powers intensifies. Join this important dialogue with the Kingston Consortium on International Security.
So my name is Stéfanie von Hlatky. I'm a professor here at Queen's University. And for several years, I was the director of the CIDP. So I got to co-organize this conference with our wonderful partners. And it's been wonderful to see the evolution of KCIS, both as a consortium and as a conference over a decade, basically. I've been at Queen's for 12 years, and it's great to see more diversity in the room. I'll say that, both in terms of men and women, also more students, with more senior representatives of the security and defense community, as well as military, academic, civil society, sometimes industry represented. So I think that's where the unique strength of KCIS lies. One thing that's also nice about this panel is that it's a nice continuity from a panel we had last year where we talked a lot about women, peace, and security, the importance of diversity and international security approaches. And again, we had a healthy mix of academics and practitioners. And one thing that came out quite clearly, really echoing some of the work that's been done by scholars like Valerie Hudson and Mary Capricoli, is that countries that fail women fail. Countries with high levels of gender inequality tend to be poorer, more violent. And so recognizing that, how do we better design international programming? How do we build that in terms of our longer term strategic outlook? And how do we then inform military practices so that we can combine shorter term tactical excellence with longer term strategic security indicators that matter for people on the ground? So I'm delighted today to welcome three experts who will take us further this year, an extension of what we were able to explore last year with a panel on diversity and gender in human security. I'll introduce each speaker right before they speak. So we'll start with Catarina, who is a policy analyst and currently advising the Minister of Parliamentary Affairs in Portugal. So we're very lucky to have an international panel today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Oh, there you go. Thank you so much, Stéfanie, for introducing me. And thank you to everyone involved in the organization of the Kingston Consortium on International Security. I am, as you can tell, extremely delighted to be here. This is my first time in Canada. And of course, I'm already thinking, should I move here? Please don't tell my minister that. But I would like to say that although I am working with the Portuguese government today, I will be speaking on my personal capacity. Therefore, my views do not reflect the views of the Portuguese government. So we'll start off with a question of why diversity matters. I think that when we address human security, of course, we tend to consider that people have different experiences and people have different visions. They see things differently based on where they are, what lenses they are using to be in that setting. And so when we address human security, we cannot forget gender and diversity. Women and girls are working with courage and determination to prevent and resolve conflict and to build and sustain peace all over the world. Yet, they continue to be excluded from decision-making and targeted for discrimination and all forms of violence and, of course, gender-based violence. So diversity is not only the right thing to do, but it's also the smartest thing to do. I know that in this audience, a lot of you are not here to hear about all these fluffy things, and you're very pragmatic and you want to go down to the core of why this matters. Well, let me tell you, if you're looking at these as if we were looking as business people, if you are seated with a table there's a diversity of experiences, diversity of opinions, then the outcome is necessarily going to be better. That's one thing that I can tell you straightforward, and I think that everyone can understand. So diversity is not only the right thing to do, as it is the smartest thing to do to ensure sustainable and sustained peace agreements. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Women, Peace and Security agenda. First of all, I would like to get a grasp of who here in this room knows what the Women, Peace and Security agenda is. Raise your hands. Okay, that's pretty good. If I were to ask this question in my country, in Portugal, this wouldn't be the outcome. So that makes me really happy. And I think that Canada can be really proud of that. So the Women, Peace and Security agenda is a policy framework that recognizes women, that women must play a critical role in all efforts to achieve sustainable global peace and security. It stems from this idea that came obviously with the concept of human security, that in order to achieve peace, you needed to have everyone in the same room, so leaving no one behind. You know, this mantra that we so often hear from the United Nations, but that really began in 1995 in Beijing with a conference that basically brought civil society in a room, and that civil society was claiming and urging governors and the countries to really act upon the major differences of experiences in conflict settings. So we really stemmed from civil society, and I want to make that case clear, because we often, we're really used to hear about top-down decisions, but with the Women, Peace and Security agenda, because it stemmed from a very urgent necessity to have women included in peace processes, civil society was actually the mobilizing actor, and it was truly the leverage for these resolution. And the first resolution is Resolution 1325 that was approved in the Security Council in October of 2000. So it has already 24 years. It's been 24 years in the making, and yet the progress is still not what we would expect. But truly, this was the first Security Council resolution. So it was truly a watershed moment. I want you guys to realize that was super important for women. I remember Hillary Clinton made the case that women's rights are human rights, and that is a very strong statement that basically is the backbone of Resolution 1325. So it really looks at the impact of conflict on women and women's contribution to conflict resolution and sustainable peace. Now, what really makes me passionate about the Women, Peace and Security agenda is that we are not only looking at women as victims of war, but also, and this is truly at the core of the resolution, as agents of peace. So we're really giving the autonomy, we're giving the power to women and girls to have a voice and to be agents of change in this process. The resolution consists of 4 pillars, and I don't want to bore you guys with everything, but just to keep you on the loop. The first one is the role of women in conflict prevention, of course. Then the second one is women's participation in peace building. The third is the protection of the rights of women and girls during and after conflict. And the fourth is women's specific needs during repatriation, resettlement and rehabilitation, reintegration, and post-conflict reconstruction. Of course, as everything in the United Nations, we've had multiple other resolutions coming after Resolution 1325 that have addressed different concerns as conflicts shift and has conflicts change their nature, change their techniques. And what we have seen in the latest years is that gender-based violence is becoming more and more a concern, because we have seen, just as we've seen in Ukraine, that gender-based violence is a weapon at war, and in that case, women are truly at the utmost vulnerability. And so the most recent resolutions, and particularly the latest one approved in 2019, really looks at gender-based violence at the core of its prerogatives. So why does it matter? Why is it so important that we are here addressing the Women, Peace and Security agenda? Well, we all know that there is no international agreed definition of gender. And sometimes it's even a bit of a taboo, when we bring up gender and when we bring up these feminist approaches to international security and to conflict. I know that for most people, I'm immediately labeled as the crazy feminist that wants to talk about the fluffy stuff. But in reality, it is so pragmatic and it's such a condition to the success of peace processes that we cannot overlook it. As a social construct, gender varies from society to society and can evolve over time. And in most societies, particularly when we're talking about Africa and the conflicts in Africa that are often overlooked by our Western constructs, gender is hierarchical and produces political, social, and economic inequalities. So because conflict affects people of different gender identities, an intersectional approach to peacemaking is needed to respond to these different groups' security and peace-building needs. Representation matters, and what we see is what we can be and is what we understand as to be the norm. So because we see men occupying most of the roles in armed groups and public decision making, we tend to consider that peacemaking and peace processes is a man's business. However, women have been involved in conflict in different roles, whether as peacemakers, as combatants, as dependents, as politicians, activists, and even as spoilers of war, but also as perpetrators of violence. That's another reality I would love to go a bit into that women are also part of that violence. Women are also bombists. Women are also combating on the other side of the peacemaking. So that's another interesting perception. But so therefore, and because this affects all genders, women have a fundamental human right to participate in decision-making processes that affect their lives. I mean, it's that simple. But women's inclusion in peace processes is also a strategic imperative, as adding a broader range of perspectives can lead to a more sustainable peace. So where are we and where are we going? This is the question that I pose you guys, and let me tell you that things are unfortunately not looking good. Surprise, surprise. So we have rising conflicts, we have increased violence, and the proportion of women killed in armed conflicts doubled in 2023 compared to the previous years. Sexual violence in conflict rose dramatically, with UN verified cases of conflict-related sexual violence soaring by 50%, and the number of girls affected by grave violations in situations of armed conflict has increased by 35%. We have displacement issues, and half of the population displaced are women and girls. We have food insecurity. Let me tell you some of the numbers. 1 in every 4 women and girls experience moderate or severe food insecurity in 2023. Healthcare infrastructure is also a big concern when we talk about sexual and reproductive rights of women and girls. That is often overlooked. I mean, it really shocks me that up until really recently, women in conflict settings did not have access to the necessary care for their sexual and reproductive health, such as having access to tampons or to any kind of equipment that you need to be a woman. Girls' education is also under fire. For me, education is at the cornerstone of every society, so it all begins and ends with education. So when we see that women and girls are being deprived from that, then that we can understand how that's going to affect generations to come. Women's voice are also not mainstreamed. I am a political analyst on television, but it is really rare to find women commenting on international politics or on security. And that matters because, again, Politics is a matter of perception, and representation matters. So if you're not seeing women talk about these men's business, then you tend to think that they do not belong in their room. They do not have a seat at the table. And lastly, the Security Council's focus on gender-related issues has significantly increased in the last decade. So yay to that. Between 2015 and 2023, over 65% of the decisions included gender-related considerations, compared to 35% in the previous 15 years. So I'm very optimistic, and it's good to really acknowledge the progress that has been made. However, in 2023, the proportion of decisions including gender issues dropped to 58%, the lowest level in 7 years. And that is related to a lot of the myths that I'm now going to begin to explain. So I made these to also break the ice a little bit. I thought about some of the myths, and I thought we could categorize the myths in terms of people. So there is the social anxiety dude. That dude is the guy that, or the woman that considers that it's hard enough to get parties to participate. So introducing new actors will actually destabilize these already very precarious and delicate processes. So, studies have found that women and civil society, when they are involved, then peace processes are 60% less likely to fail. They are 60% less likely to fail. So in reality, the social anxiety dude or woman, doesn't know much about the facts, because if you get these different actors to participate in the decision-making process, then it's actually better. So that's a myth, and we have already addressed that one. Then the second myth is the procrastinator, that thinks that women's perspectives can be brought in later since they won't be useful in ceasefire. Well, spoiler alert, that's not true, because men, again, because we see that men make up most of the combatants, many assume that war is a man's domain. But again, women play a wide range of roles during and after conflict, from combatant to peace builder to mediator to spoiler, from victim to agent. So it is important when we go into a peace building setting to understand the context, to understand the precedent, and to understand that mediators should come to negotiations armed with the truth and the history of women's leadership in that culture. I just saw that I have 1 minute left, so I will make these very short. Another myth is the person who thinks that adding salt and pepper should do the trick with the recipe. So it's the same as saying that adding women to the equation is enough. It is not. It's not about adding women and steer it. You really need to make it a qualitative input rather than a quantitative input. So it's about thinking why you're doing rather than checking the box and ticking the box just because you have to. And then another one is the sorry ma'am, we're doing everything we can, or the bread crumber. That's the person who really is showing you just as much as they can to make you really feel like they're in fact including women in peace processes, but in reality you're not really seeing impact and you're not really seeing progress. And a major game changer in that is really assessing impact and having metrics to assess what you're doing, why you're doing, and where you're going. All right. Well, I would have a lot more to say about this, but I just want to leave you guys with this final idea that, stakes could not be higher. What we're seeing in Afghanistan worries us all, because it's a huge setback in everything that the United Nations, that civil society, that you guys have been doing. And therefore, women and girls are really looking up to us, because we're so lucky to be able to be in this room, to not have our own lives at risk at this current moment, and to have a discussion that I hope is as productive and open as I'm trying to make it. And it is not about ticking the box. It is also not about being dogmatic. Many of the things and many of the truths that I've spoken today might not resonate with you, and that's fine. I want to hear your opinion, and I want to hear what you have to say about this. But truly is about compromise, putting women at the table, letting them negotiate, letting them also plan, and mostly Create investment. Everything revolves around money. So if there's no investment to women, peace, and security, nothing will ever be done. Let women have a foot in the field, and let women not only be the voice, but also the change makers. So thank you.
Thank you, Catarina. If there are any skeptics in Portugal, they don't stand a chance. All right. I'm also grateful because you created some natural segues with our two other presenters by speaking to prevention, which I know that Dr. Vanessa Brown will address, as well as the importance of representation. And we have Lieutenant General Bourgon to speak to that too. So next up, we have Dr. Vanessa Brown. Dr. Brown is a professor at the Canadian Forces College, but also the program chair with IUS. If you don't know IUS, a very great network for scholars and practitioners to meet on topics of the sociology of the armed forces, civil military relations, and her research contributes to the Dallaire Center of Excellence on Peace and Security. Thank you, Vanessa, for being here.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. And I've been so delighted to meet new faces and to see old friends. So I'm really delighted to be here today. Thank you for the invitation to KCIS, and the organizers are doing an incredible job, and including the folks back there who are working on the microphone as I kind of scramble around here. So thank you. So I stayed up late last night doing the war game, which is actually like a simulation game. And so I apologize for my my voice. It's a little bit hoarse now because we were yelling over each other to get the game going. But I think it's a really important thing to have these discussions, these meaningful discussions about diversity, inclusion, human security, women, peace, and security, and what it really means for us as professionals wherever we are. And so I wrote a paper a year ago for the Dallaire Center of Excellence for Peace and Security, really grappling with the military's role, particularly around women, peace, and security and human security, and noting that the military had, for a very long time, focused on protection activities and less so on prevention. And as we move forward and we take a look at the diverse security challenges that are faced by civilians all over the world, and including at home, prevention is a really key space for the military to be involved in. So the paper that I wrote is entitled "From Protection to Prevention: Shaping Military Roles Through a Gender and Intersectional Lens." So I'm going to caveat this presentation as I really want your help. I have all of your minds here from all of your different fields in the military, in civil society, as academics, as students. So I really want to leverage your brain power. So this is my call to say, I have some recommendations at the end of the paper, and I would love your help on those. So in writing this paper, I wanted to examine what roles and responsibilities armed forces can reasonably take up in prevention activities, both related to women, peace, and security and human security. And drawing from research across critical academic literatures and key international, national, and Canadian armed forces policy documents, there is evidence to suggest that militaries are increasingly being asked to support prevention activities. These literatures also suggest that contributions to prevention work requires additional skills to understand and address the root causes of insecurity related to interconnected hegemonic systems of power. Now, when I say interconnected hegemonic systems of power, those are really lofty, big words. What I'm really talking about is what makes us unequal in society. So we heard a little bit earlier about colonialism, empire. We heard about patriarchy. We hear about ableism. We hear about heteronormativity. These are all really important systems of power that often make us unequal and make our lives unfair at any given moment. And these inequities are only exacerbated in times of conflict and crisis. So this is really what I'm talking about. What's the military's role in understanding that and preventing inequality more generally so that we have more resilient societies in the face of crisis and conflict? So in the paper, and I'm happy to share it because it's pretty long and I'm trying to truncate it into a 15-minute presentation. But I really wanted to see what was the call for the military, like what was the impetus for prevention activities, and how is the military rising to the occasion in this fora. The second part of the paper talks to what are the challenges in the military's involvement in prevention activities in relation to other governmental departments, civil society organizations, and the impacts of military activity on the ground in relation to prevention. So I wanted to tease out some of the challenges. And then the third part of the paper is what can the Canadian Armed Forces do? And what is the Canadian Armed Forces already doing in this terrain? So what I would like to learn from you at the end of this discussion, and not to take away from my fellow panelists and questions that you will have for them, but drawing from your own experiences as military personnel, as members of NGOs, as personnel from other government departments, my question to you is, what should the military do in relation to prevention, and what should the military avoid doing? Okay, so for you to answer this question, I want to say that I'm gleaning from the Women, Peace, and Security agenda to define what prevention is. What do I mean by prevention? And I look at prevention in the broadest sense. So we heard a little bit earlier about prevention as part of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. So really understanding how to prevent conflict from happening in the first place. Also, how to prevent those intersectional impacts on diverse women, men, girls, and boys, and gender diverse people when it comes to everyday life, but also what is exacerbated in conflict and crisis. So from a human security prevention point of view, we're also looking at access to food, access to water, access to resources, education, all those things that make us unequal within society. Those are also prevention activities that the military, I think, may have a role to play in. So in ways that are distinct from but related to physical, state-centered understandings of security, human security calls for states to really consider not just military threats, but also threats to peace from economic and social crises. Indeed, the UN's Agenda for Peace urged through the adoption of new legislation and actions that states have their governmental departments identify at the earliest possible stages situations that could produce conflict and remove the sources of danger before violence even erupts. And so to do so, the UN calls on states and their agencies to address the deepest causes of conflict, including economic despair, including social injustice, and political oppression. So incidentally, these inequalities are key drivers for any conflict, but can also lead to different and often disproportionate human security risks for subpopulations of women, men, girls, boys, and gender diverse people. So I'm going to pause here for a moment. We asked about who knew about Women, Peace, and Security. So for the Canadian Armed Forces members and Department of National Defense members in the room, who's familiar with Gender-Based Analysis Plus? Okay.
Better be.
you took a online PowerPoint click session. We'll talk about that later before the CDS comes. Okay, so who here thinks that they have a pretty good understanding of what intersectionality is by a raise of hands? Okay, less of us, right? So we're like middling. My voice is giving out on me. Okay, so I think it's a good opportunity to invest in intersectionality. So what is it? All right. Intersectionality was coined by a legal scholar whose name is Kimberly Crenshaw. And she really started to look at what are the impacts, what are the inequalities that exist in the labor market, particularly in the United States around the 1970s. So she takes a look particularly at the auto manufacturing industry and Black women's experiences in discrimination in that industry. So she finds that particular auto manufacturing companies were hiring Black men on the production lines of automobiles, and they were hiring white women in clerical roles, but Black women were being hired under neither context. So she says, at the time, the law had no way of understanding Black women's discrimination on more than one basis, right? So from a legal perspective, were women being hired? Absolutely. From a legal perspective, were Black people being hired? Absolutely. But the intersection, the connection between these two forms of hegemonic systems of power, being colonialism, racism, and patriarchy, sexism, they were in clash. So Kimberly Crenshaw says, if you imagine yourself standing literally at a physical intersection with cars going this way for racial discrimination, and then cars going this way for gender discrimination, well, Black women were at the collision point. They were at the intersection. So that's her imagination of what intersectionality means. Now, for anyone in any governmental department in Canada, we understand intersectionality to be the plus in gender-based analysis plus, right? So now we understand that intersections can come from a variety of identity and experiential factors, including gender, including sex, sexuality, including ethnicity, age, the region in which you're living, your religion, your language, your family status. So all of these different intersecting identity factors and experiences have a relationship to those hegemonic power systems that I was talking to earlier. So this is what is really, really important in human security, because as CAF members and as Department of National Defense members, if we plan for those collision points, we can better assess who needs what kind of care, who needs what kind of response, at what time, and in what way. So it makes us smarter. So this is the idea of prevention. So I think I'll move on to where I'd like to go, where I'd like to see the military go, and the rationale behind it. So with women, peace, and security in the Canadian context, women, peace, and security used to look like the problems of others out there. Right. So our national action plans historically had a very outward-facing kind of look. It had Canadian Armed Forces members thinking about the inequalities that women in international fora were experiencing. And now, with successive national action plans, we've started to take a look inward, which means that even our defense policy understands that diverse people within the local domestic Canadian context need to be understood for the differential and often disproportionate impacts of everyday life on their security, and how those are only exacerbated in times of conflict and crisis. So our defense policy says that we have to pay attention to this. Our national action plans on women, peace, and security say we have to pay attention to this. And guess what? Within the Canadian Armed Forces, we have a handy-dandy directive from the CDS in 2016 that says all Canadian Armed Forces have to integrate a gender-based analysis plus intersectionality and gender perspectives within all of their institutional work and all of their operational work. And I think that's really important for the Canadian Armed Forces to consider in relation to human security. So beyond pandemics, the Canadian Armed Forces have also been increasingly called upon to support climate-related events such as hurricanes, floods, and forest fires. And when the Canadian Armed Forces provide support to these climate events, the response falls under Operation Lentis. So a really great case study for the application of gender perspectives and intersectionality in Operation Lentis is the Gatineau flooding in 2017, where a robust gender-based analysis plus approach was used, and Canadian Armed Forces members understood very essentially that they had to provide different responses at different times to different sections of the population for better effect. So they were able to respond in a meaningful way, in a tailored way to the kind of inequalities that were being experienced and exacerbated in the context of flooding. So these are the things that I think the Canadian Armed Forces is really good at, but could get much better at making sure that the application of gender-based analysis plus the use of gender perspectives and the collection of data can be more robust, can have more resources, and can make us even more operationally effective. So I'm going to move to my recommendations so that I save you some time. Thanks. So approaches to prevention in militaries can generally be divided into two time-bounded categories of work. So there are short-term practical strategies and operations, and structural or long-term prevention beyond set operational timeframes. So to begin, it's important for militaries to consider how prevention activities can take place internally through institutional work, as well as externally through operations in domestic and international contexts. So institutionally, militaries can contribute to prevention work by mainstreaming gender perspectives and the principles of women, peace, and security agenda across command and control, leadership, and management, including but not limited to education, training, policy programs, materiel acquisitions, and infrastructure. So institutional prevention work involves creating enduring structures and systems which support the application of gender and intersectional analyses across systems and doctrine, policy, and culture. So those strategic level examples could include better resourcing for the systematic application of gender-based analysis plus by creating fully funded gender advisor and gender focal point roles. Ooh. They're like shepherd's hook. And so if we have fully funded gender advisors and we have fully funded gender focal points, maybe we'll have a better assessment of why things move inexplicably in human security terrain. I also think that we should have resourcing on disaggregated quantitative and qualitative data collection and analysis systems within the context of the Canadian Armed Forces. That's a drawback that we have within our institution. If we resource the collection of data and if we resource the analysis of that data, we're going to be far more prepared to create those tailored responses on the ground when it comes to human security. I also think, and the Dallaire Center of Excellence for Peace and Security is working on this currently, but to create military-specific doctrine and policy on prevention areas such as sexual exploitation and abuse, sex and human trafficking, children in armed conflict, women, peace and security, and human security is essential. And also in my role, developing training and education on prevention rules for Canadian Armed Forces institutionally and operationally should be resourced and is paramount. So in terms of operational prevention tasks, we could also think about the military's role in developing its own skills beyond the competencies of traditional warfighting. These competencies include developing skills to research and identify conflicts of interest within or between subgroups of women, men, girls, boys, and gender diverse people, and to understand the military's position vis-a-vis these subgroups. We could also identify potential gender-based and intersectional sources of conflict and recognize the root causes of those conflict so that the military can support in addressing inequalities before they escalate into risk. We can also identify personal, institutional, and social biases and overcome these with evidence-based knowledge through that resourcing that we talked about earlier. And we can also collaborate with diverse civil society organizations in local communities, other governmental and non-governmental organizations that work on prevention response. Time's up. That's perfect because that was my last call in terms of what we could do. So I want to thank you very much and sorry for taking up all the time.
She made me do it.
Okay. I did draw a smiley face on there. So, thank you so much, Dr. Brown. And I'll just note here, if you didn't see it in the bio, that Dr. Brown received a CDS commendation for her work in terms of military education and curriculum. So congratulations on that again. Next up, we have Lieutenant General Lise Bourgon, and you know her as the Chief of Military Personnel. I knew her before she was famous because she was here at Queen's as a visiting defense fellow, and so I got to see firsthand the research work that she did on recruitment, especially the CAF's target of 25% of women in the armed forces by 2026. I think that'll feature in the presentation. General Bourgon, over to you.
Et merci Stéfanie, c'est vraiment un plaisir d'être ici avec vous ce matin. No one freak out, I will switch in English. C'est vraiment un plaisir d'être ici. Le CIDP est vraiment proche de mon cœur. J'ai appris et eu une période extrêmement incroyable, une année pour réfléchir, penser, arriver à plein de solutions, comment qu'on peut améliorer les forces armées canadiennes. I've been the champion for women, peace and security, and now I'm the champion for women. So of course, this field is my passion. The human security is complicated and it's complex. I think this morning I'm just going to talk about, the CAF perspective and 3 components that I think that are absolutely key from the security landscape. First is the importance, of course, of having female soldiers available, trained, and deployable is absolutely key. Second is really, as Vanessa was talking, is the importance of integrating a gender perspective into operation. And finally, the connection and the link that we must have with the civil society, the organization, and the NGOs. So that will be the talk this morning. So diversity and gender representation, all of you have convinced, I know that you're convinced, are absolutely essential on any given security operation. I think that UN NCR 1325 and the WPS agenda clearly reflect this criticality. First, as peacekeepers, we must represent the society that we are there to protect. And second, we need to interact with that society to ensure the security needs of everyone are being met. Okay, I think that as individual soldiers, women are as good. I won't say better because the men will get defensive, but we are as good as men soldiers. But I think that what makes them even more invaluable on the ground is really their ability to interact with the local population that some men don't get to do. They get access to information that, again, men soldiers cannot do. And even more important, okay, and that what we can never forget is that we bring a different perspective. We think differently, okay? It's not that we're better, that we're worse, we're just different. And that difference is really, really what is important. Okay, that is the strength of diversity. I think that our defense policy, strong, secure, and engage, really recognize this and has a strong focus on gender equality and diversity. After all, if we want women to be able to deploy on operation, there has to be an appropriate pool of women that are trained, qualified, and available. And as last month, I can tell you that the representation rate of women in the CAF was 16.6%, okay? Still far from the objective of 25%. Okay. I can tell you that we're not going to get to 25% by 2026, in case any one of you were doubting this. But that does not mean that we must not continue to improve. Okay. And we are doing the best in everything we do, examining everything that we do to improve the attraction, the recruitment, okay, from media awareness campaign, the branding of the CAF, improving the actual recruiting system, which belongs to me, by the way, I know. We're doing everything we can. Of course, all of you realize that we are fighting a very attractive, thank you. Attractive civilian market, very low unemployment rate. Competition is fierce for recruits, okay? So that is something that is difficult. We're also, getting through our media, our bad reputation. We lost a few feathers in our crisis in 2021, and now we're slowly trying to recover from this, and our image is improving. Thank you. But Canadians, and when you look at society, Canada and Canadians are still very gender traditional in their role. And we're seeing this in the CAF also. The majority of our recruits, women recruits, are applying for the purple trade, okay? So the admin, the legal, the medical, and it's very, very difficult to recruit on the combat arms side. And this attraction to the more gender traditional role creates some really unique challenges for deployment on operation. You can imagine, in the last 5 years on our UN deployment, we have not been able to reach our 25% objective that is stated by the UN. The same on operation right now, domestic operation, about 15% of our deployed individuals are women. On NATO, it's around 12% because it's difficult because most of the deployed position are into the combat role and women are not interested into the combat role. So it's a challenge for us to fill that, but we can't solve this without a change in society also. Okay, how do we change Canada as a society for women to be more attracted to those non-gender traditional roles? So that's a role that all of us have to do. And of course, when we look at recruitment, we cannot forget the side of retention. It's absolutely vital to ensure that we keep our personnel as long as possible. And of course, as a military personnel command and chief military personnel, that's a big part of my job on working on retention. And I think that's going to be key to eventually get to our 25% employment equity objective. And I can tell you that in the last 4 years that I've been, the year that I did my fellowship, I looked at the CAF and where were what were the gaps and how we could support better our employment equity groups. So when I arrived in my position as deputy and now as commander, I had a long list of things that I wanted to do. And I have to say that a lot of the list have been crossed off, okay? The things that we've done in the last 5 years, that doesn't mean that we are done, okay? But we've done a lot from the point of view of looking at our succession planning, how we promote individual. There was systemic barriers on how we did things. How do we support women, okay? From a health perspective, but also from a family support, because we know that women carry the burden a little bit more than the men counterpart on raising children, on aging parents, and everything else. So those are the concerns that we need to address to make sure that those barriers, systemic barriers that are still in our system, are corrected so that everyone, and I'm talking about everyone, has the same opportunities to be successful and to be the best they can be, because we need to get there. The GBA plus analysis is absolutely vital. I own something like 600 policy instruments that were written in the 80s and the 90s, okay? They were written by men for men. That is the reality, okay? It's not bad. It's just that we need to evolve. We need to transform. We need to look at all those policies, rewrite them to make sure that they're fully inclusive. If I had une baguette magique, for me, daycare would be absolutely essential. We're seeing it as a huge barrier for employment. And actually, men are starting to talk about daycare. So thank you, the men out there that are talking about daycare, because that is where, a lot of women decide to jump off the train because they have to make a choice. Do I want to be a good mother and raise my children and make sure, or do I want to continue and progress in the CAF? So daycare for me is absolutely vital. So indeed, that recruitment and that retention and that pool is absolutely essential for the WPS agenda. But also important is also the integration of that gender perspective into operation. And I would say that from an operational perspective, the CAF has done a very good job at integrating a gender perspective into our operation, both domestically, but also expeditionary. The CAF and CJOC, they continue to deepen their application of GBA Plus and gender and military operation in every operation. And really in order to create that resilience and effectiveness in our team and also on the plans, okay? Like recent example include the deployment of a mixed engagement team to support the non-combatant evacuation contingency in the Middle East, something that 5 years ago we would have never seen. Furthermore, we have trained gender advisor, assigned and deployed on all of our international and domestic operation. And these gender advisors have direct link and entrance and access to the force commander, okay? 6 GENAD were deployed across the world last year, including in Haiti. And that's their job, mainly to liaise with the staff, the civil organization, the civil agencies. But again, have direct contact with the commander. So from a planning perspective, we've also developed gender annexes because, if you're in the military, we need those checklists, okay? Well, we have checklists and now we have annexes that bring that gender perspective from a J2 or the intelligence place where you can look at what is expected. As Vanessa said, the data, you need evidence, you need that information to be able to make good plans, and plans are a J5 function. And again, what are we supposed to consider from a gender pieces? And of course, the execution is absolutely key. We've embedded these planning into the Army Staff College, but also in our own staff college. It's in every exercise that we're doing as a dimension, because we all know that if you don't practice something, you never actually get good at it. And of course, Canada continues to lead internationally. Like, we've produced the aide-mémoire on how to integrate gender into operation that we've made available to the entire world in both languages. And I think it's being translated into different languages right now. Of course, we continue to work with the UN on concepts like the engagement platoon, but also on camp infrastructure design, because it's important to be, again, inclusive. Which brings me to the importance of leadership buy-in. And this is absolutely critical for success, okay? And I think that all of the commanders, with their perspective, when they are appointed, they need to understand, but even more, they need to believe, and the importance of that gender integration, that WPS agenda is absolutely key. And I think that, we're seeing at this point the highest degree of leadership is being looked at on this file, like the UN WPS CHOD network that was created, I think, as Canada as one of the first participant in this, and the second chair continues to go on. At this point, it's either General Caria or last meeting, it was General Prévost that went to the meetings, and this network of CHOD continues to develop. Okay, the more we can share best practices, we can help each other. That's the fastest way that we're going to get there. And that's my personal opinion here. Can NATO do more? Okay, and Stéfanie in her book was very clear that WPS and NATO is very laissez-faire to a certain point to the country. Okay, I had a good discussion a couple weeks ago when I was in NATO with the special representative Irene Fellin, and she is trying very hard to bring a more of a directive approach to WPS, a little bit like the UN did a few years ago, but it's difficult, okay? And I think that NATO could play a better role there, but we're going to leave it there. So the third piece that I want to talk about before I get the 1 minute is really the connectivity and the link with the civil organization. Because I think that on that piece, we have to do better. And as Vanessa said, in support of prevention, CAF has a role, okay? Not a leading role, as she said in her paper, but as a supporting role. And on that piece of supporting, if we are the organization that is usually given the responsibility for the security on the ground, but we don't understand the actual environment because we don't have the right connection with the agencies that are on the ground, how can we be successful? Okay, so we need to have that better coordination and support and working together. There's a certain level of trust that is required, and that trust has not always been there for good reason. But I think that the CAF has shown in the last 10 years that we hopefully can be trusted, and those organizations we need to work together to better understand so that we can, make plans and support them and their success. We need to work together and not apart. That is absolutely key. So really, in conclusion, which is all of your favorite word, is experience has shown that diversity and inclusion of women and minority groups are essential to military success. Together, we are stronger, more agile, and responsive. And the understanding of the problem that are brought forward and the solution that are brought forward are more complex, but will lead to success, okay? So in the end, we are not doing it because we have to. This is not a woke agenda at all. It's not because we have to. It's because that we want to. We understand that it's a choice, and it's about mission success. But if we want women to join in the CAF, the requirement for change is absolutely clear. Okay, we cannot have a cohesive, effective team if members feel that they're marginalized or unsafe. Individual cannot achieve their career potential if we don't recognize their talent and enable them to be the best that they can. Okay, so we must align our values to the values of Canadian society and align our conduct to meet those values and those standards. I think it's absolutely essential for our leadership to be really inclusive and reward that inclusivity. Okay, so the institution absolutely has to change, but I wish there was a magic solution, and there's none. It's PAF, it's across CAF, across the pan CAF changes that must be made, and a lot of them are being made right now to address the structural and the cultural inequalities facing women and our employment equity group. The time is now to listen and to continue to define those gaps and close those gaps to make sure that the CAF is as inclusive as an organization and it can be and an employer of choice for all of our people. It's hard work, okay? It's very, very hard work. The easy stuff we did in the last 3 years. Now it's really grabbing ourselves and tackle the hard. Are we going to fix everything by tomorrow? Absolutely not. Okay. But we are making progress every day. And I think that all of us together, we're going to get there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and right on time.